You have a pile of quilt blocks. They might be from a project you fell out of love with, or some that you made from a pile of scraps. Today's quilting tutorial is all about just simple quilt pattern layouts, getting those blocks out of your sewing space and into quilts. And stay to the end for a free handout. So stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. Hi, I'm Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts. I give you tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make. And if you like what you see, please click that subscribe button. The last couple of months have been crazy busy with family members visiting and my sewing space doing double duty as a third bedroom. And I've had a couple of health issues that I've had to deal with. So I have needed projects that are quick and easy to pick up and don't require a lot of space or brain capacity. If you're like me, over the years, you've accumulated a ton of quilt blocks, and it's about time we put them into quilts. Here are some simple block layouts that can be used when you have a pile of blocks. And I've done all the math, so you don't need to. Before you even start, take a moment to think about where your finished quilt will go. Is it for a particular person, an organization, or a place in your home? Because starting with the end in mind will tell you what size and flavor you need your quilt to be, which translates into how much money, effort, and time you're prepared to invest. If you're thinking about a particular bed size and you don't know how big your quilt needs to be, I've already done a video about mattresses and their corresponding quilt sizes, and I'll leave a link to that video in the notes below. I need baby quilts that I donate with some friends to my local hospital, and I make them about 32 inches square. I also need couch-size quilts for Quilts for Survivors. And for these quilts, I aim for 45 inches by 60 inches. And I want to make some campfire quilts for my family. And we're all big people. So for those, I'm making them 60 by 80. The next step is to grab your blocks and ask yourself the following questions. How many blocks do you have? What size are they? Are they in sets or are they all different? Is there a common fabric? What color are they? And by handling them, you'll be able to see what they have in common. I have a ridiculous amount of scrappy 6-inch and 4-inch blocks. And though there's no common fabric, theme, or color holding them all together, I have such a quantity I should be able to make some subsets. So for this project, I am choosing just to put them in a simple grid, just using one size of block at a time. If you're interested in improv layouts, take a look at this video here. So this is a basic quilt layout. All the blocks are square and they align with each other on the horizontal and the vertical. This layout is also the most straightforward for calculations. Now, some of you might not want to do the math, so I've made a free handout that you can download from my website with a different page for each block size. And you can use this chart several ways. First, you can lay out your blocks by seeing how many vertical and horizontal rows you can make. And in this example, we're using 8-inch blocks in a layout of 8 rows by 6. Grab the chart for your block size, then find your rows on the header bar. Where the vertical row intersects the horizontal row, it tells you what size quilt you can make and how many blocks you used. Or you can start with how many blocks you have and find the sizes that that quantity will make. So for example, if you have 15 12-inch blocks, these are all the sizes you can make. Or you can start with the quilt size that you need. So if you have 6-inch blocks and you want to make a 45 by 60-inch quilt, you have an option of 42 by 60 or 48 by 60, all size up. So that means you'll need 80 blocks in 10 horizontal and 8 vertical rows. The next step is to get all the blocks up on the design wall and see what you have. Once they're all up, switch out any that look out of place. Then stand back and check for value placement. Take a black and white photo and adjust accordingly. On this quilt, I want to alternate high and low value blocks like a checkerboard. so I need to do a bit of shifting. When you're happy with your layout, do one last check for any blocks that have directional elements that are upside down, or more importantly, all the seams nest nicely with their neighbors. You might need to rotate your blocks or swap out a few. For me, my blocks are either crosses or dot in the middle. Blocks number 5 and 6 from my scrappy sampler block video. And they are made so that all the seams nest nicely with each other. But it doesn't work all the time. Taking the time to check will mean that when they are all sewn together and pressed, the seams will lie flat. You might want to use sashing for a variety of reasons. If your blocks are different sizes, if they're small, or if they don't nest together well, sashing will solve that problem. But maybe you want more color, or the opposite, you want to tone down too many colors. Sashing can help with that too. And the good news is that you can still use the chart. Just add the sashing finished width to the block finish size and use the appropriate sheet. So in this example, we would use the chart for the 8-inch block. And since you will most likely add sashing to the bottom and the side of the quilt, add 1 sashing width to the height and the width of your quilt. Now I'm going to skip over the details of how to make sashing, as I've already made a full video about it. Why to sash, how to use color, how to choose the right width, and how to sew it all together. And I'll leave a link to that video in the notes below. Finding new teachers and things to learn. For a limited time, the first 1,000 people to use the link below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Some people love scrappy, some people not so much. So you can tone down the chaos by controlling the contrast. And we can do that several ways. We can choose a limited color palette by only using particular hues. This quilt used only purple and orange, which are on opposite sides of the color wheel. This quilt has less contrast by using analogous red, orange, and yellow. This one is just red blocks. They're all still scrappy in their various patterns and from a big variety of shades, tints, and tones. But within those hues, there is a cohesion through the focus on color. You can also control where the contrast is. This is a blue quilt with just a touch of yellow in a band here. Here, I've only used cool colored blocks, but I've alternated the low-value dark fabric with the high-value light fabric. In this example, I've used all the colors, but only desaturated versions. That is color from this side of the color wedge, giving it a soft, warm feel. And how about these zigzags, which is easy enough to do if you're consistent in your block orientation when you lay them out. If you're wondering what these color terms mean, hue, value, saturation, I have a full color series, and of course I'll leave a link to that playlist in the notes below. Sometimes you need to make a bigger quilt, but you don't have enough blocks. Let's say you have some 6-inch blocks, and you need to make a quilt that's 60 by 80. If you look at the chart, you would need 140 blocks in 14 rows by 10. You could use sashing. If you use 2-inch sashing, then going to the 8-inch block chart, you would still need 80 blocks. But what if you only had 48 blocks, let's say? Well, then you can make use of negative space by substituting background fabric for those missing blocks. In this example, I am sewing my sashing strips on the vertical, making stacked columns with varying heights. I'm only using warm colors, and I don't want a lot of contrast in my background, so I'm using this small red check. As I sash my blocks, I can see that I'm going to have some challenges aligning my blocks between the rows. If you have this problem too, here's a big tip. Stagger them. In this quilt, I'm adding a 3.5-inch piece of background, or half a block of sashing, to the bottom on every other row. So now alignment isn't so much of an issue. After the stacks are pieced, add a strip of the backing fabric to fill in the row to make the row 78 inches tall. Then sashing strips are added in between the columns. Then the columns are sewn together. I always use a quilting glove on my left hand to help handle the bulk, and a good press and thread check. One last step to square up the top, and this quilt top is finished. My next stack of blocks are Jelly Roll block number 2 from this video here. This is where you sew a set of 4 Jelly Roll strips together and trim them to 9 inches. Then trim a 2.5 inch strip from the side and either spin it or switch it out with another strip. So I want another 60 by 80 inch quilt. These blocks finish at 8 inches square. They are all warm oranges and reds. However, I only have 21 of them, even if I sash them with a 2-inch strip, so they're 10 inches. If I use the chart, I would need 48 blocks to make a quilt, but I'm not making 27 more blocks. So another method that you can use is just to make a corner and have a descending step. And it's perfect. I have just the right amount of blocks. I'm using this olive linen for the sashing and background, which adds a nice contrast in hue to make those blocks pop. This is very similar to the last method, except the first sashed rows are on the horizontal instead of the vertical. 8.5 inch strips are used to fill in the background. A sashing strip is sewn between the rows. Then an 18 by 62 inch strip is sewn along the top. I just love this one. It might be too good for the campfire. Sometimes the grid layout is underwhelming. You feel like it just needs a little bit more something. You can try changing the orientation of some of your blocks. Here I have 9 Jelly Roll block number 5. I love this block. It's made with 2 ORPHAN Jelly Roll strips sewn together, then divided into 3 equal pieces. Then sewn back together, then cut again into another 3 equal pieces, splitting the middle one and sewing them all back together. It finishes at 12 inches by 12 inches. And I find if I just turn some of the blocks, it gives the layout a bit of punch. This is my favorite block layout. Putting your blocks on point is easy enough, but a bit challenging to figure out, as the size of the quilt is a function of the block diagonal, and as you lay out each row point to point, another row with a different number of blocks is formed in between them. You also need a half square triangle to finish off each corner and quarter square triangles to finish off the end of each row. And you assemble the quilt top in diagonal rows like this. As I said, it's easy, but a bit tricky. Yes, I did a chart for these ones too, but it has a number of changes from the grid layout one. For example, if you want to make a baby quilt and you had 50 4-inch blocks, you can look on the chart and see that you can make a 28.5 by 34-inch quilt, having 6 horizontal rows plus 5 vertical ones, plus the shorter rows in between them. At the top of the chart, it tells you that you need 4 HSTs, and to make them, you need 2 3¼ squares cut on the diagonal. You also need 6.5-inch squares for the inset QSTs, and for these dimensions, you need 5, cut on both diagonals. Once you have the blocks all laid out, it's pretty simple to sew them all together, but it's always good to lay out those quarter square triangles to be sure you have the right orientation before you sew. I was worried when I started this project that scrap fatigue would set in quickly, and I made a promise to myself that I would stop as soon as boredom set in. But I kept making them, and then I made some more, and then I made some more after that. I'm at 19 quilts and counting. My scrap block pile is almost gone, and I have so many flimsies to get quilted. My next goal is to practice my free motion quilting skills, so stay tuned. If you want your own copy of the chart for grid layouts or on-point layouts, follow the link in the notes below or visit my website, justgetitdonequilts.com/quilt layouts. If you want to catch my color series, I will leave a link to that playlist here. If you want to make some scrappy blocks, I'll leave a link to that one as well. Take care, and I'll see you next time.